She walked into a luxury car dealership in jeans and sneakers, and they laughed her out the door. What they didn't know, she was married to a billionaire. What happened next? A lesson in humility, humanity, and the kind of quiet power that money can't buy. But character can. This story will move you and make you rethink what real worth looks like. Morning light streamed to floor-to-ceiling windows of Valemont Prestige Motors, nestled in the heart of Fairhaven's bustling business district. Sunlight danced across the polished exteriors of luxury vehicles displayed like jewelry in a showroom. Rolls Royce, Aston Martin, McLaren, Bentley. Each car was a declaration of power and status. Ariana Brooks stepped through the entrance, the glass doors closing behind her with a soft ding. She wore faded indigo jeans, a plain white t-shirt, and her hair was tied neatly at the nape of her neck. Her face was bare, untouched by makeup. No designer handbag. No stilettos. At 36, Ariana didn't need those things to prove who she was. But others didn't see it that way. From across the showroom, Chad Whitmore, senior sales manager, sized her up with a single glance. He nodded subtly to two sales associates nearby and smirked. "Another window shopper chasing a fantasy," he muttered. Ariana strolled slowly among the gleaming vehicles, her gaze lingering on a deep blue coupe, the Aston Martin V12 Vantage. It was the car she had chosen for her younger brother, Alex, who had just come through a life-saving liver transplant. Today wasn't about indulgence. It was about honoring survival and giving back to the person who meant most to her. A young associate, Jalen Martinez, approached with a friendly tone. "Good morning, ma'am. Can I help you with any of the models today?" Before Ariana could respond, Chad swooped in like a conductor taking over a symphony. "I'll handle this one, Jalen," he said, cutting the younger man off. Then he turned to Ariana with a polite, tight-lipped smile. "I'm sorry, miss. You might be looking for the used inventory lot. That's about 3 buildings down, across the shopping plaza." Ariana raised an eyebrow, answering calmly, "Actually, I'm interested in the blue V12 over there." Chad's expression tightened, but he kept up the facade of courtesy. "Ah, that one, it's a limited edition, listed at $295,000. We typically show that model by appointment only, usually to clients referred or pre-qualified." Ariana continued smiling, her eyes still locked on the car. "I understand, but I think today calls for something special." The atmosphere began to shift. A few customers turned to look. Some salespeople stifled quiet chuckles behind manicured hands. Chad glanced once more at Ariana's simple outfit, then back at the vehicle, as if double-checking that she understood what she was talking about. His voice dropped, edged with condescension. "You're welcome to take a brochure. When you're ready, we can consider scheduling a visit." Ariana looked at him for a moment and nodded. No argument, no shrug, but inside, something was stirring. Not from the insult aimed at her personally, but for all the others before her, those less fortunate, who had been treated just the same with no one there to speak up for them. She remained by the V12 Vantage, her gaze unshaken, under the sunlight pouring through the towering glass ceiling. The midnight blue paint of the coupe shimmered as she slowly circled the car, her hand brushing lightly across the sleek curve of the hood like it was water. "I'd like to see the interior," she said softly, but with clear resolve. Chad Whitmore squinted, the sensation of being challenged making him visibly uncomfortable. "I believe I already mentioned, Ms. Brooks, that this vehicle is shown by appointment only. Clients typically come in through private brokers, or, at the very least, present themselves more appropriately." "You mean dress more appropriately?" Ariana asked, smiling faintly, but her eyes didn't smile. Chad froze for a beat, not out of fear, but because he wasn't used to being called out directly. "That's not what I said," he replied, tone sharpening, the politeness fraying. "We simply have certain standards. This model isn't for people just looking to browse. I'm not here to browse. I'm here to buy." That statement tilted the room. A few staff members nearby turned their heads. Jalen, the younger associate who had been pushed aside, stood near the front desk now, eyes silently pleading to step in, but unsure how. Chad laughed, a cold, sharp sound that rang louder than it needed to. "Buy? You're saying you want to buy the V12 Vantage right now?" Ariana nodded. I can wire the funds immediately. Or pay in cash, if that's more convenient for you. The laughter died instantly. Chad stepped closer, his tone now openly mocking. I'm sorry, but we reserve the right to refuse service if we detect any risk, especially when the customer can't demonstrate verified purchasing capability. Ariana met his gaze head-on. Are you saying I can't afford it? No, I'm saying, well, anyone can see the situation for what it is. This isn't a grocery store. This is Valemont Prestige Motors. And our clientele usually don't show up to buy a $300,000 car in a $5 t-shirt and scuffed sneakers. Ariana didn't flinch, didn't defend herself, didn't raise her voice. She simply stood up straighter and let the silence stretch long enough for everyone in the showroom to understand something crucial. This was no longer a private conversation. A few customers had started turning their heads toward them. One older woman across the showroom even frowned at the phrase, verified purchasing capability. Jalen shifted, as if he wanted to step forward, but Chad's glare held him in place. Ariana slowly turned to leave. Each step carried weight, but her head remained high. She wasn't being thrown out of this place. She was walking out on her own terms, with her dignity intact. But deep in her chest, something unshakable was rising. Not anger, but resolve. A voice rang clearly in her mind. Tomorrow I'm coming back. The midday sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk as Ariana Brooks pushed open the glass door and exited Valemont Prestige Motors. She didn't look back, though behind her, the whispers, the muted giggles, and the sneering stares clung to the air like humidity. Ariana walked on with absolute composure. No confrontation, no angry retort. And that, more than anything, was what unsettled Chad Whitmore. She wasn't mad. She hadn't taken the bait, like so many others he'd handled in similar situations. To Chad, her silence felt like an invisible slap, its echo stubbornly hanging in the air. Across the street, Ariana paused beside a silver-gray Lexus SUV. Her private driver quickly stepped out and opened the door. She slipped into the back seat, fastened her seatbelt, and then pulled a phone from her small handbag. Call Quinn, she said, her tone calm as still water. Moments later, her assistant's voice came through the earpiece. Yes, Ms. Brooks? Everything okay? Ariana smiled, her first genuine smile all morning. I just stopped by Valemont, and you won't believe what just happened. She recounted everything. The disdainful glances, the mocking tone, and how Chad Whitmore refused to sell the car, even though she'd offered to pay in full on the spot. But she told it as if it had happened to someone else, because she knew this wasn't the first time she'd been judged by her appearance, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. What would you like to do? Quinn asked, a hint of protective outrage in her voice. Ariana looked out the window, eyes tracing the branches swaying in the breeze. Nothing impulsive, she replied, but something they'll never forget. She reached into her bag and pulled out a tablet, quickly scrolling through a few financial dashboards. Send me the full pricing breakdown for the V12 Vantage. Include all showroom units and any unsold inventory on the lot. Also, connect with the Foundation's internal media team. I want to schedule a gift announcement. Yes, that's right, for the Back on Wheels initiative. There was a pause before Quinn chuckled. You're giving away the cars? No, Ariana said, her eyes gleaming with a mischief that only those who truly knew her would recognize. I'm planning to teach them a lesson, and the ending will be twice as beautiful. In the driver's seat, her chauffeur glanced up into the rearview mirror and allowed himself a faint smile at her last words. He'd been driving Ariana for 3 years, long enough to know that when she said, the ending will be beautiful, no one would forget what came next. The Lexus quietly merged onto the southbound freeway, heading out of downtown Fairhaven. In Ariana's mind, a plan was already taking shape. Not to seek revenge, but to challenge a tired, toxic habit, judging people solely by what they wear. That afternoon, Ariana Brooks returned to her slate-roofed villa in Beacon Hill, where she and her husband, Grayson Brooks, had lived together for over a decade. The home blended classical architecture with the kind of cutting-edge technology that perfectly reflected Grayson's personality. Forward-thinking but never rootless. Grayson was in the library, eyes fixed on a real-time graph tracking renewable energy markets across the wall-sized screen, when Ariana walked in. One glance at her face, and he knew something had happened. What happened at the dealership? Grayson asked, closing his laptop. Ariana sat beside him, took off her sunglasses, and recounted the morning's encounter. From the condescending stares to Chad Whitmore's mocking refusal to let her even look at the car. She didn't cry, but her eyes, calm and deep like a lake after a storm, made Grayson fall silent for a long beat. "I thought judging women by their appearance went out with black and white movies," Grayson muttered. "Apparently some people are still stuck in the last century." "I don't want their apology," Ariana said. "I want their understanding." Grayson stood, walked to the minibar, and poured 2 glasses, not wine, but water. "We're not going to reclaim dignity by tearing them down," he said, placing a glass in front of her. "We're going to lift them up with a lesson they'll never forget." Ariana nodded, eyes brightening. "Exactly. But we need a centerpiece, something they can't ignore." After a moment of thought, Grayson raised an eyebrow. "You still have that limited edition Rolls-Royce Phantom, right? The Midnight Violet one?" "Of course." "Then that's what we'll drive," he smiled. "And one more thing." He tapped a few times on his phone, then turned the screen toward her, displaying a list of students and faculty from the public elementary school where Ariana had once funded a mobile library project. "Why are we inviting them?" she asked, surprised. "Because those who've been underestimated make the best witnesses," Grayson replied, his tone suddenly serious. "I spoke with the school principal. They're planning an educational field trip, and Valemont will be their very first stop." Ariana burst out laughing. "You're turning a morality lesson into a community event?" Grayson winked. "No, I'm turning it into a living declaration of kindness and of human worth." She was quiet for a moment. "I like that." Together, they sat down at the large digital board in their home office. On it, Grayson began sketching a game plan. Arrival at 10 a.m. Students walk in at 10:15, media to be coincidentally alerted, and Ariana will be the very last to enter, wearing the same simple outfit that had caused her to be dismissed the day before. A lesson in dignity, wrapped in a little drama. And it was just beginning. Do you think the Brooks plan is absolutely brilliant? Comment with number 1 if you're here for this iconic comeback. The next morning, Fairhaven skies were a flawless blue. Along Beacon Street, already accustomed to the sight of luxury cars, a 2024 Rolls-Royce Phantom, extended in midnight violet, pulled smoothly into front lot of Valemont Prestige Motors, glinting under the rising sun like royalty arriving for a gala. Inside the showroom, everything seemed to freeze as the car rolled to a stop by the front doors. The spirit of ecstasy hood ornament trembled ever so slightly in the breeze, proud and unmistakable. From the rear passenger side, a tall man with warm brown skin stepped out. He wore a tailored light gray suit, gold-rimmed Randolph sunglasses, and polished Oxford shoes. Grayson Brooks. His name began to ripple through the staff in whispers. One receptionist even dropped her coffee cup as she realized who he was. The founder of Brooks Tech, the tech powerhouse that just landed a $2.4 billion federal contract for renewable energy storage systems. Grayson entered the showroom like time had slowed around him. Every dismissive glance, every smug smile, every snide comment that had been thrown Ariana's way the day before now seemed to hang in the air, suffocating under the weight of sudden, stunned silence. Chad Whitmore, the sales manager, was in front of a mirror adjusting his tie when the front desk whispered through his earpiece, "You need to get to the lobby. Now." That's Grayson Brooks. Chad Whitmore rushed out, forcing a professional smile onto his face. "Good morning, sir. How may I assist you today?" Grayson removed his sunglasses, his eyes sharp though his tone remained composed. "I'm here to buy the midnight blue Aston Martin V12 Vantage in the showroom. Yesterday, my wife came in to look at it and was turned away." Chad froze. I'm not sure who would have." Grayson cut him off, not loudly, but with words that struck like steel. She wore a white t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers, and she was directed to the used car section. "Ring a bell." The air in the lobby thickened. A few curious customers began to whisper, and Jalen, the young sales associate, stood nearby, His face flushed red as understanding dawned across his features. "Mr. Brooks," Chad stammered, "Aston Martin V12 Vantage, of course. I sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding. You're more than welcome to view the vehicle. I'll personally—" "No need," Grayson said, eyes locked on Chad. "I'm not here to view it. I'm here to purchase it. Right now. Full payment. Electronic transfer." "Yes, of course. I'll start preparing the paperwork," Chad replied hastily. Grayson looked around the showroom, then pointed to Jalen. "You there. What's your name?" Jalen, sir," the young associate replied, blinking rapidly in disbelief. "You were the only one who treated my wife with respect yesterday. You'll handle the entire transaction." Jalen's eyes widened. He could barely believe what he was hearing. Chad Whitmore, on the other hand, stood frozen, jaw tight. The blow wasn't just a nearly $300,000 sale, but that the commission would go to the junior employee he had previously brushed aside. Grayson allowed himself a small smile. "Oh, and one more thing. My wife will be arriving shortly. She's picking out a second car for her brother. Let's hope no one suggests she walk 3 blocks again." Just as he finished speaking, the glass doors of Valemont Prestige Motors swung open. But it wasn't just Ariana who entered. A group of nearly a dozen school children of every age and race entered with 2 staff members from the Brooks Foundation. Some kids were in wheelchairs. Others wore leg braces. On their T-shirts was a logo, a heart with outstretched wings, the symbol of the organization Ariana had founded. The room seemed to break open. Every eye turned toward the group. A few customers started pulling out their phones to take photos. One sales associate whispered, "Who are the kids?" But no one responded. Grayson walked slowly to the center of the showroom, his voice calm and clear. "These are children from the Brooks Foundation's Community Reintegration Program. And today, I didn't bring them here to prove a point, but to show you something simple, that the people often labeled as burdens to society, those who've been denied service, denied opportunity, even denied eye contact, are often the ones who can teach us the most important lesson: how to see others without judgment." The atmosphere in the showroom shifted. Quiet, heavy, reverent. All eyes turned to a group of students coming through the glass doors, accompanied by volunteers in bright orange T-shirts bearing the Brooks Foundation logo. A brown-skinned boy using a walker beamed with joy as he gazed at the gleaming cars. A girl with hearing aids held up her phone to capture the moment. A boy in a wheelchair spun in slow, playful circles beneath the showroom lights, as if he were dancing to an art exhibit. Something cracked open in the cold polish of the space. No one spoke, but the silence itself deepened the emotion. A female associate near the reception desk, one who had smirked the day before when Ariana was dismissed, now covered her mouth, eyes brimming with tears. Another employee quietly put away the phone he'd been recording with and simply looked, really looked, at the children with genuine warmth. Chad Whitmore remained rooted to the floor. The arrogance that had clung to him all day evaporated. He stared at the children, of every race, body type, and ability, as though they had just pulled back the curtain he'd been hiding behind for years. One boy, maybe 8 years old, with sun-kissed skin and a prosthetic leg, approached Chad and looked up at him. "Mr. The boy said, soft but firm, "Do you work here?" Chad nodded awkwardly. Yes, I do. I like this car a lot." The boy pointed at a silver coupe nearby. "But I think whoever drives it should be someone really nice." Chad froze. In that instant, there were no sales charts, no KPIs, no titles. There was only him in a clear, unfiltered gaze of a child, holding up a mirror to how he had once measured others. A soft piano melody began to play through the showroom speakers, a gentle instrumental that soothed the tension left over from the previous day. Slowly, employees began walking toward the group of students. Some knelt down to ask their names. Some handed out balloons. Others simply sat on low chairs to meet the kids eye to eye. Grayson stepped back, allowing the scene to speak for itself. Then, the glass doors opened once more. Ariana Brooks walked in. No blazer, no designer bag. Still the same simple white linen shirt, blue jeans, and worn-out sneakers. But this time, no one laughed. A hush swept across the showroom as Ariana walked in, the sunlight pouring through the skylight, casting her in sharp relief, like the central figure in a living portrait. Chad swallowed hard. His chest tightened as he realized Ariana hadn't just returned. She had returned with a quiet power community of her husband and of the children who stood for an entire humanistic ideal. "She's your wife?" Chad asked, his voice catching in his throat. Grayson didn't respond. He simply nodded, a silent gesture that landed like a sentence. Ariana stopped at the center of the lobby, nodding gently to Jalen before resting a soft hand on the shoulder of a boy in a wheelchair. Then she turned her gaze toward Chad, not angry, not contemptuous, just calm and deeply, unmistakably disappointed. Just then, the showroom doors opened again, this time to a cluster of reporters with microphones and cameras. A young woman from a local news station spoke up. "Excuse me, we just received word about a special event hosted by the Brooks Foundation taking place here. Could we speak with Mr. or Mrs. Brooks for a quick interview?" Chad stepped back slightly. His face had gone pale. Grayson turned, a trace of a smile in his eyes. He spoke, his voice clear enough for everyone to hear. "You've arrived at the perfect moment. Because today, I want to talk about something we rarely mention in this industry. How we treat others when we think they don't matter." The silence returned, but now it was a silence of reflection. A door opened at the back. Out stepped James Whitmore, Chad's father and the owner of the dealership, his face stern and his tone even more so. "What's going on here?" he asked, low but authoritative, the weight of ownership evident in every syllable. No one answered right away. Chad remained frozen. Grayson turned to face James Whitmore directly, no hesitation in his stance. "I came here to purchase a car, the one Ariana, my wife, tried to buy yesterday. But more than that, I came to make it clear that the way your staff treated her based on appearance is unacceptable, especially when that person happens to be the founder of a foundation that has helped over 10,000 children with disabilities across America receive education and medical care." Chad opened his mouth to respond, but Grayson raised a hand. Firm, final. "I'm not finished." At that moment, Jalen Martinez, the young associate who had witnessed the entire scene the day before, quietly stepped forward. He glanced around, swallowed hard, and spoke with a voice that was both steady and unmistakably resolute. "Mr. Brooks is right," Jalen said. "I was the first to greet Mrs. Ariana. She was respectful, asked about the blue V12 Vantage. But Manager Whitmore stopped me. He dismissed her and even mocked her outfit in front of other customers." Chad's face turned crimson. "You didn't have to." "No, I had to," Jalen interrupted, standing up to Superior for the first time in his life. "Because yesterday I stayed silent, and silence is a form of complicity." The air in the room turned heavy. James Whitmore glanced from his son to Jalen, his expression unreadable. "I will look into this matter seriously," he said, his voice lacking its usual haughty tone. Grayson nodded, then turned to Jalen. "Thank you. Courage is rare in places like this." Jalen bowed his head slightly, his eyes reflecting quiet gratitude. Grayson slowly walked over to the gleaming hood of the car and stopped. "Ariana doesn't need an apology, but I want to make sure people like her, people who get misjudged every day, never hear the words, 'You don't belong here' again." Silence blanketed the Valemont Prestige Motors showroom, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning and the weight of glances exchanged between customers, employees, and the two men now standing across from one another, Grayson Brooks and Chad Whitmore. No one spoke. No one moved. Chad swallowed hard, but his throat was as dry as if filled with sand. Grayson stepped forward, his voice steady but calm. "To be honest, I originally planned to buy a new fleet for my company. 6 luxury SUVs and 3 sedans to replace our current line. A deal worth nearly $2 million. A gasp echoed from the office area. James Whitmore clenched the armrest of his chair. "But," Grayson continued, eyes locking on Chad, "I didn't come here to teach anyone a lesson with my wallet. I came to shift a mindset." Chad gritted his teeth, trying to keep a composed expression. "So, what you want?" Grayson smiled, not out of anger, but conviction. "I want you to volunteer with the Brooks Foundation for 6 weeks. Work with our quadriplegic youth group at the rehab center. No money involved. Just your time, your compassion, and the right attitude. The room seemed to explode with silence. Chad stepped back. You got to be kidding. I'm a sales manager, not a babysitter. Then came a sudden clap. From a customer, a middle-aged woman in business attire standing near the SUV display. I think that's a brilliant idea, she said. The man beside her nodded. Working with kids might help you rethink how you treat adults. Chad spun around, face flushed. I don't need a morality lecture from people who don't even know me. It's not a lecture, Grayson cut in. It's an opportunity. A staff member approached James Whitmore and whispered something in his ear. His expression darkened. After a few moments of thought, he nodded and turned to his son. Do it, Chad. Restore your dignity. And keep our family name off the front pages tomorrow. Chad bit his lip, locking eyes with Grayson. If I do this, will you cancel pulling the order? Grayson smiled. No, I'll keep the order. But all transactions will be handled by Jalen Martinez. He's the only person here who acted like a decent human being. Jalen blinked in disbelief. Mr. Brooks, You've earned it, Grayson nodded. When Chad left the dealership that afternoon, clutching a bright orange volunteer t-shirt and a 6-week schedule of shifts at the Brooks Foundation, those who had once smirked behind Ariana's back could only watch in silence. Some of them even began to question themselves. As for Grayson, he said just one thing before stepping into the waiting phantom outside. Not everyone in simple clothes is poor, and not everyone with a title is worth respecting. On his first day at the Brooks Foundation Rehabilitation Center, Chad Whitmore walked in with a stiff face, the volunteer shirt stretched awkwardly across his shoulders and bags under his eyes. He wasn't sure what was worse, giving up posh meetings with VIP clients, or wiping drool for kids who couldn't even sit up. But then he met the first boy, Micah, 9 years old, completely paralyzed, with deep black eyes that held something Chad couldn't look away from. You the new guy? Micah asked, voice soft but firm. Yeah, Chad replied, fumbling with the handles on a wheelchair. Micah grinned. You look more like you're about to faint than help out. The whole room burst into laughter. Chad flushed red, but for the first time in years, he laughed too. A real laugh, not one born from sarcasm or smug superiority. 3 days later, Chad still hadn't gotten used to the smell of disinfectant or the tears during physical therapy, but he had gotten used to Micah demanding superhero voices during story time. He also learned how to remove leg braces, check ramp angles for wheelchairs, and, perhaps most unexpectedly, how to sit in silence for hours while a boy played a simple melody on organ using the only finger he had left. By the 3rd week, Chad had stopped checking his watch. He arrived early, cleaned up therapy equipment himself, and even suggested organizing a car day event where he borrowed a few showroom models from Valemont so the kids could touch the cars they'd only seen on TV. That day, Micah sat on Chad's lap, his hand resting on the steering wheel of a cherry red convertible, eyes gleaming like stage lights. I'll drive one of these someday, Micah whispered. Chad nodded, not just to be polite, but because he meant it. I believe you will. In the weeks that followed, no one called Chad the uptight sales guy anymore. Jalen Martinez, now acting manager at Valemont Prestige Motors, shared with staff that Chad had asked to extend his volunteer term by another 3 months, even though the mandatory part of the program had already ended. And Ariana Brooks received a message from him one evening at the beginning of the month. Thank you for making me see what I used to ignore. I was wrong, but now I'm learning to see people, again from the start. At the Brooks Foundation Center, a new photo was framed and hung in the main hallway. Micah sitting proudly in a toy car, one hand raised high, and behind him, Chad grinning like a child. A man who once judged others for worn-out jeans had now learned his greatest life lesson from a little boy, and from a woman he once dismissed as if she didn't deserve to be heard. That weekend, as Chad Whitmore helped a young girl adjust her seatbelt on a wheelchair during an outreach picnic organized by the Brooks Foundation, his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. Chad? This is Grayson Brooks. Chad froze. His heart skipped a beat. Why, yes, hello, Mr. Brooks. We're planning to update the fleet for 3 new offices, Grayson said calmly. "And I'd like to know if you're ready to handle the order." There was a pause. Grayson continued, his voice steady. "Not because of your title, but because Jalen said you've genuinely changed." Chad swallowed hard. It would be an honor, and I promised to do it right. This time with heart, not just a contract. The next day, at the Valemont Prestige Motors office, Chad arrived in a simple white dress shirt and pale blue tie. He didn't walk in with his usual swagger, but calmly and steadily, carrying a portfolio he had spent all night preparing. Jalen, now in charge of corporate fleet accounts, greeted him with a firm, warm handshake. "I already told them, you're the right person for this." Grayson Brooks arrived on time, alongside his wife, Ariana, still as effortlessly elegant as ever, her hair tied back, her gaze as clear and perceptive as always. "We need 7 vehicles," Grayson said. 3 SUVs for senior staff, 2 sedans for VIP clients, and 2 electric cars for our new complex. "I want you to advise not just on models, but on meaning what our brand stands for." Chad nodded and opened his presentation. But instead of starting with technical specifications, he led with a slide bearing one bold sentence. "True human worth isn't measured by appearance, but by how we live and what we give." Ariana glanced at her husband, smiling softly. Grayson nodded in approval, visibly impressed. The meeting lasted over 3 hours. No voices were raised. No one was dismissed based on how they looked. Chad was no longer a boastful salesman, but a humble professional, with perspective, with heart, and now with trust. Once the contract was signed, Grayson rose and extended his hand to Chad, gripping it firmly. "You didn't just sell a car today, Chad," he said. "You proved that change isn't just possible, it's necessary." Chad bowed his head, unable to hide the emotion welling up inside. He knew this moment couldn't be bought. It was earned through every hour of service, every tear he'd wiped from a child's face, every time he'd chosen to listen instead of judge. Opportunity had returned. But this time, he was no longer the same Chad from before. A month after the fleet contract was finalized, the sprawling 6-acre campus of the Brooks Foundation in suburban Cambridge hosted a small ceremony to honor its top summer volunteers. White balloons, symbols of hope, floated gently against the bright blue sky, their reflections dancing on the surface of the calm lake behind the stage. Chad Whitmore stood in a simple t-shirt bearing the foundation's logo, next to a young boy named Micah, the same boy he'd met on his first day at the center. Micah, now more cheerful, more confident, was the very person who had taught Chad the most important lesson of all. No one needs to prove they are worthy of respect. Ariana Brooks stepped onto the stage, microphone in her right hand, her left resting gently in her husband Grayson's, a subtle symbol of strength. She wore a simple navy blue dress, her hair flowing just below her shoulders, and her eyes soft as she looked out at the audience. Not the eyes of a woman once humiliated, but of someone who had risen above it with grace. Someone once asked me, Ariana began, why I didn't retaliate, why I didn't buy out the dealership and fire every person there. She smiled gently. My answer is simple, because real change doesn't come from punishment. It comes from opportunity and choice. Her eyes found Chad, who now stood with his head bowed, and continued. Sometimes, the only thing that separates a person from the best version of themselves is someone willing to believe in them. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, but it was genuine. After the ceremony, when most people had gone, Chad stayed behind to fold chairs. There were no cameras, no photos being taken, just a man quietly stacking plastic seats into the back of a truck, sweat soaking through his shirt. Ariana and Grayson watched from a distance. Neither said a word at first. I think he gets it now, Ariana whispered. Grayson nodded. Because this time, he said, no one's watching, and he's still doing what's right. They turned and walked away, hand in hand, leaving behind a golden sunset washing over the lawn, and a lesson that needed no plaque to be remembered. Their story didn't end with luxury cars. It ended with a simple truth. A person's true worth isn't in how they look, but in how they treat others, especially when no one is watching.